Hello, I'm Lihi. Great to see so many familiar names on the chat. I think we are ready to start. So welcome everyone. Today we have very special guests joining us. This is our EarthX Live 2024. So Happy New Year to everyone. I really hope your year started well, wherever you are. And yes, and we are very happy to be here with you. So your host, as always, myself, I'm Lihi Rotem Ganani. I'm the Director of Digital Transformation in the Council, Ranger, our exercise director, and Chris, who will be all hosting with me. And before we start, people always ask, how can I know more? How can I be more engaged? How can I be part of the solution and not just be worried about the problem or admire the problem? So I welcome you to visit our media center. In our website, we have so many articles and blogs and videos, and all past events are recorded there. So you can get free access to that. And of course, you can join our membership program where you can get full access to all of the resilience research that we have, including our handbooks. We have 4 of them. We are about to finalize another one shortly about Black Start that we will be discussing this in our upcoming summit. And of course, social media, we have a presence on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on Twitter. So wherever you feel comfortable, join us there. And yes, we have another in-person summit coming up. Actually, the auditorium is almost full. So if you have plans to join us, do it today. You can request your registration on the website, on the conference website at EIS website. And London, after such a great success last time, we're going to meet again in Imperial College London in September 24th, 25th. Save the date for that. Our website, I would encourage you to visit there and learn about all the work that we do. We, besides those webinars and events that we host our international audience, we create. We have a Genome, a technology platform we are building for chaos management. We're working on the Human Continuity Project with partners from all over the world. Black Sky communication system for a black day, a very black day that we will still have to communicate. And of course, EarthX is why we're here today. So I encourage you to go and see all the work we do and join us wherever you wish and could contribute to our efforts. Today, Avi will make a short introduction about Black Sky, what it is. Ranger will present scenarios, and then we will have a panel discussion. And I encourage you to use the chat. We will answer questions, and if we can't catch your question, we will send you a reply. So feel free to use the chat. And that's it. And Avi, the floor is yours.
So thank you very much, Lihi, and thanks to everyone for being here and being part of this. As I have said before at some of our previous events, if you're taking the time, as clearly you are, to be part of this discussion, it means that you are part of a very unique group of people who has the imagination to understand that extremely bad things could happen, and the initiative and the commitment to try to be part of the solution. So again, thanks so much. Thanks to all of you. So Lihi, let's just go through the first few charts. So this overall, I think it's important to understand there are 8 billion of us sharing this planet, and what's making that possible is our new, very tightly interconnected technology, or high-tech infrastructures. And the level of connectivity that's making this possible has continued to increase. It's really just in the last 5 years or so that we have gotten to the point where I think it's very appropriate to think of all of our infrastructures today as a single organic interconnected system. Next chart, please. So the problem with an interconnected system is if you have an event that is severe enough to disturb a very important element of that system, like damaging an organ in a body, the entire system can be disrupted or in a severe case can collapse. It's really just the last handful of years where we've gotten to that level. This is not like it used to be. Civilization has never had this kind of vulnerability. And it takes civilizations a long time to recognize and evolve, to change. And this is something that we cannot allow to be an evolutionary process. That's not going to be fast enough. So examples here, black sky events. So as we speak, Hawaii is suffering from rotating blackouts because of an extreme storm. It's not the storm per se that's causing the rotating outages. It's a shortage of sunlight because a very large fraction of their electricity comes from sunlight. Japan, a very serious earthquake, between 100 and 200 people who have unfortunately died. Extreme earthquakes, sometimes called megaquakes, they happen in a heavily infrastructure zone, like, for example, the New Madrid seismic zone in the center of the United States, where there's a lot of critical infrastructure. Gas pipelines could shut down a significant section of the electric grid. And then, of course, what we see on this slide, the attack on Israel October 7th, which initiated a war which is already bringing in the international community, the United States, the United Kingdom, and a number of other countries now working together to try to protect the global shipping, which is heavily dependent on use of the Suez Canal, the Red Sea waterway, which to a large degree is now not available. If this spins further out of control, Lebanon gets involved, Iran gets sucked into the war. Of course, their patron, China, Russia could be tied in, and the consequences for the world could be horrendous. So the question really is natural events which happen on a regular basis. And for example, an extreme solar event, extreme solar storm, megaquake in the wrong location, a malicious event, war and the consequences of war, if it pushes past a threshold and shuts down enough of our interconnected infrastructures, it's a real question. What will happen first? Because at some point, one of these extreme events is going to happen. So before that happens, we need to be ready. That will require a global effort. And what we're going to talk about today is a critical example of what it's going to take. You cannot produce electricity without fuel. At this point, natural gas, particularly critical to producing electricity. And of course, you can't keep natural gas moving without electricity. And both of them depend for their resilience investment planning on the regulatory structure. So thank you so much to the panelists who are here today in all three sectors, electricity, the regulatory sector, gas. I'm looking forward to the discussion. For those of you who are listening in and participating, please do take a look at our website. You'll find resources and materials on what you can do to prepare your own home, as well as you can for these kinds of events. And we have kicked off, we're in the process of initiating what we're calling the Human Continuity Project, which is a worldwide effort with most of the work being done by universities, large corporations, to spread these resilience initiatives across the world and all infrastructures. But you as individuals can get involved. We are looking at creating local participating working groups in different cities, different communities. If you're interested in an idea like this, just get in touch with us and use the contact us page on our website. And as Leahy said, you could certainly become a member and use all the resources we have available there. So thanks so much. And Leahy, back to you.
Thanks very much, Avi. Appreciate that. Your comments. The scenario we're going to get into today is certainly a direct line. It is not a stretch from the things that you already just talked about, given the actions in the world. And we're so happy to have experts from the three sectors. I don't want to go into long introductions because time is short, but Tom Galloway from the North American Transmission Forum, David Batts from the Edison Electric Institute, and Adam Ingram from Duquesne Light will be our electric sector experts. Next slide, please. Representing the regulatory sector, Gladys Brown-Dutrell, former Public Utility Commissioner and Chair in Pennsylvania, Rick Moroz, the New Jersey Public Utility Commission and former president of NARUC. Next slide. And finally, natural gas sector, Dr. Paul Stockton, former Assistant Secretary of Defense for Homeland Defense, not a member coming from a gas owner or operator sector, but Paul has been doing some incredible work looking at the natural gas electric dependency, cyber vulnerabilities, cyber interest by China and others to as a way to disrupt our critical infrastructure. So that sector will be well represented for this scenario. I'll now hand it over to Ranger, who will be our master exercise practitioner today for his comments and then getting us into the scenario. Over to you, Ranger.
All right, thank you, Chris. We last did our last event in September. The world has changed a bit since then. We have a lot of things happening out there, and I'll just throw out the question: are we closer to a black sky event than ever before? Do we have a lot of saber rattling out there? We have multiple world leaders. You see almost daily something in the news with another leader talking about using nuclear weapons. We're seeing that each of them has an EMP program. We've seen a number of ways of delivering these devices. Next slide, please. We've also seen a lot of hacks to systems that one would think were not hackable. That is a problem for us to consider. And that takes us to where we are. Now that we have you very comfortable that we're in a happy world and nothing is wrong, we're going to give you a scenario that says the opposite, that takes us to a very bad day out there. And Chris, please go ahead and let's play the first video.
Real concern this morning over reports of 2 nuclear explosions that occurred at approximately 3 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, about 20 miles into the upper atmosphere over both the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans. It is unclear if it was some sort of military test or a failed missile attack. Explosions were reported about 350 miles offshore on both sides of the U.S. mainland. One explosion southwest of San Diego, the other east of Florida. No indication as to who launched them. No one has claimed responsibility at this point. We are waiting for more information and government confirmation, and we will provide updates when we get them. NWS breaking news. Power and communications have shut down the island of Bermuda, apparently due to this morning's nuclear explosion over the Atlantic.
Lights are off here in Bermuda. The power outage has knocked out communications across the island. Tourists have begun to look for ways to get home. But with the Bermuda airport closed, many people stuck here with no idea what the future holds.
Still in shock from yesterday's disturbing events, this morning, people across the United States and around the globe found this on their computer screens. Besides this ransomware attack, a number of targeted cyber attacks, including attacks on major global landmarks, Last night, the lights on the Statue of Liberty blinked on and off. In Times Square, outdoor screens showed flashing skull and crossbones images. Also, lights went out on Big Ben in London and on the Eiffel Tower.
We have been asked to activate the BSX emergency communication system by a number of emergency authorities based on concerns of international instability. Starting last night, a wave of ransomware attacks have been hitting organizations with weaker cybersecurity. In a number of locations, that includes critical lifeline utilities. Now, while directed attacks have been mostly limited to national icons, the nature of these attacks is worrisome. The technology used was able to bypass some very secure systems.
All right, thank you, Chris. What we're going to do now is we're going to go to our panels. Sorry for the frog in my throat there. What we'd like to do first is I'm going to throw questions panel by panel, and each will give their thoughts. And then once we do that, we'll allow the panelists to have a crosstalk and share concerns and thoughts for each other. And then we'll open up any questions that show up in chat. We'll try to fit some of those in. But what we really want is to get your immediate thoughts. We're going to start with gas with Dr. Stockton. What immediate concerns do you think the gas sector has, and what impacts do you expect in the loss of power over, say, the next 72 hours? What would that do to the natural gas system?
Ranger, first, I'd like to reiterate what we heard in the introductions from Chris Beck. I don't currently work for any companies in the ONG subsector, but for the Department of Defense and other federal entities, I've been working hard for decades on preparedness against black sky. And the natural gas subsector is more important than ever before to grid reliability and also basic home heating. My home here in Santa Fe, New Mexico, looking out the window, it's snowing hard. If we were to lose gas, it would be a very cold day in the Stockton family. So the first thing that the ONG subsector and natural gas system owners and operators would be concerned about, of course, is their customers, service to their critical customers. But from a narrow operational perspective, I believe that the first thing that companies would want to do is establish situational awareness over the status of their systems right away. And this is not easy to do in the case of EMP, and above all, the E1 pulse, the fast rising pulse can affect microelectronics. Figuring out what kind of equipment damage that you'd suffered, what are the effects on your operations, given the importance of microelectronics to gas compression stations, other infrastructure, your ability to communicate with the gas system owners and operators and your partners, and especially the risk of persistent presence of adversary malware on operational systems in gas infrastructure, living off the land attacks, zero-day attacks, all kinds of emerging threat vectors from China, Russia, and other potential adversaries, making sure that you have the connectivity you need to folks who can help you identify and eradicate this malware. All of these initial tasks would be front and center for the ONG subsector. And let me emphasize the great extent to which gas owners and operators have been building preparedness against these kinds of threat vectors. The risk, of course, Ranger, is that adversaries are improving their capabilities at least as rapidly.
All right, thank you, Paul. Let me take the question now to the regulators. Let's start with Gladys, and same questions. What immediate concerns and what impacts do you foresee in the next 72 hours from the loss of power?
Just to pick up a little bit in terms of what Paul was saying, as what the scenario that he laid out, to me, I wanted to start with the reason why training and preparedness before any type of situation is very important. The interaction between the regulators and the entities that they regulate is important continuously, so that we're not trying to figure out what to do when an incident like this happens. I know that for this scenario, we need to be starting steps down the road because we've already done that type of training. They need to be reaching out to the regulators, whatever, in this case, we're talking Bermuda, but in general, the regulators for the industry, also with the governmental entities, so the governor's office and the other elected officials, because everyone's going to try to figure out exactly what's going on. So picking up on those type of factors that they've already had the training, they've already had different tabletop discussions, trying to figure out exactly what would happen in different type of scenarios so that they can just, start from there and move forward to try to put those measures in place.
All right, thank you, Gladys. Rick, same questions, please.
Yeah, in a situation as dire as this is, I think that there are several issues, several matters that the regulators are going to want to know and be involved in. And they're going to want to know first and foremost and want to have that ongoing communication with the companies about the extent of the damage of an event like this, and which components have been compromised. And secondly, and as a result of that, what the potential for either first restoration would be, and a timetable for that, and a realistic timetable, which is necessary, as well as whether regardless of the extent of the outage, whether there are systems in place to operate without whatever components or portions of the system have been damaged. So it's really a continuity plan, knowing what the industry can do, how quickly it can fix or resolve any of the equipment damage, and be able to accurately convey to the regulators so that the regulators in the industry can then convey to public policymakers, Gladys mentioned the governors or other federal partners, for example, how they can articulate the length of the outage that comes from an event like this, the extent of the damage, and then how they can continue to operate, if possible, even manually or on a regional or localized basis. And that means communication. It means communication that's clear from the company that is responsible or has responsibility to the regulators to explain the extent of the damage, how long it may take to resolve, and ultimately so that can be passed along to policymakers and then to customers too, as well, so they know what they're in for going forward from an event like this.
All right, thank you, Rick. I do want to point out for the folks, there are polls that are coming up. If you'll go ahead and answer those, please. Those are to help us collect information. And what I'd like to do now is move to the electric sector. Let's start with David Batts, please.
Well, good morning. First off, I'd like to thank the EIS for putting on this event. This will be pretty challenging. I agree with some of the previous statements that a fair amount of energy is going to be expended to understand current situational awareness regarding the matter. I would think that groups such as the Electricity Subsector Coordinating Council would be activated to facilitate engagement not only between the electric sector, but also government and regulatory partners to be able to share situational awareness and provide assistance and insights where efforts need to be focused.
All right, thank you. And then next, let's hear from Tom, please.
Tom, your mic was muted for a
Yeah,
second.
there we go. Sorry about that, guys. Thank you, Ranger. So I kind of parse some of my thinking into three different buckets: preparation, people, and parts. So as a couple of other panelists have mentioned, to be able to kind of deal with a situation like this, there's a lot of advanced work that needs to take place. You need to understand the priorities and align on those with your cross-sector counterparts. You need to understand who you need to be talking with in those other sectors. And there's a certain amount of hardening and capability that needs to be built into the system that'll help you weather these type of storms. On the people front, Dave Batts mentioned the ESCC, and they're kind of a pivotal role in terms of mutual assistance. So as we need to kind of surge resources to support different areas that are unduly impacted, they would be the key on that, making sure that that coordination takes place. And then spare parts or parts generally is a significant issue, right? We're seeing longer and longer lead times on standard orders of parts, let alone kind of having to replenish in under exigent circumstances. So understanding what capabilities you have in terms of spares, sharing across companies, and then a number of companies have already built in kind of innovative key spares for resilience. The last couple of points I'd make is in the immediate, situational awareness, as was mentioned by Paul Stockton and others, is key. Understanding the degree of impact and recognizing that some of the tools you use to gauge situational awareness will have been affected by these events, right? So that's an immediate consideration. The other thing is the scope of these events and the nature of these events typically speak to malice and or an act of war, and therefore the ability to project power would be a high, that much higher a priority in this circumstance than it might otherwise be. So those are some of my initial thoughts.
All right, thank you, Tom. Adam, your thoughts?
Yeah, thank you, Ranger. Agreeing with all the answers before me. One thing at the local transmission distribution level is getting swamped with how many situational awareness forums there are going to be, whether it's at the federal, state, or local level. Everybody's going to want to say or have an input into it. So feeding through that from just the local level as we try to understand, potentials as it either stays local to the Bermuda area or the southeast portion of the United States. Is the Public Utilities Commission in every state doing their own thing? Are they looking to the National Association, NABRUC, to give them guidance? Is DHS leading the effort? Is Department of Energy, Cybersecurity, and Emergency Response leading the effort? DOE Caesar? There are so many things going into it, but ultimately, right, with the North American Electrical Liability Corporation, NERC, EOP 5, which is the system restoration plans, it's really transmission operators understanding, okay, what does our NERC EOP 5 say? These are the plans that all transmission operators have, and then getting a base on, again, the situational awareness, and then ultimately understanding, do we have any impacts or will we see any impacts to our, smart pole top devices, these microprocessors that were mentioned earlier, the supply chain piece of it as well. How many do we have in stock if we start to have problems? Will we see disruptions from the stockpile that are not being used? How long will it take us to even get those or recover some of the ones we have? So those are all some of the things that are going through at the local level, removed from Bermuda. Not to mention, again, just the massive amount of people who are going to try to be standing up these situational awareness briefings or calls. Another big one is going to be the EIS Act, the Electric Infrastructure Security Advisory Council. What are they publishing, and who's ultimately has the say or the truth that we should be looking towards? Thanks, Ranger.
All right, thanks, Adam. And one of the things about this scenario is, yes, we could have had the scenario happen directly over the United States or over Europe, but we had it as kind of a side hit. And the reason behind that was to show the threat, the possibility, and continue on discussions. If we had it directly overhead, a lot of folks we found in exercises throw up their hands and say, well, we're done. We're not prepared. There's not much we can do. But we're in a heightened state of sensitivity at this point. Because we realize that it's possible something has happened. Somebody was willing to let the genie out of the bottle. And that's kind of the picture that we've tried to portray here. But what I like to do now is really get the cross-sector discussion going. And what I really would like to do is have you talk about what do you need from the other sectors to maintain your operations, and what information do you need, and who are you going to get it from, and how do you connect? I think that's important to make sure is how do we connect when it's a very bad day out there? And I'll just kind of let it be an open mic at this point. Different sectors, anybody with thoughts?
Well, Ranger, I'll be delighted to go first. Natural gas system operators are going to be urgently contacting their electricity counterparts in order to get grid provided power reestablished for their compressor stations and other electricity dependent infrastructure. Thank goodness that the natural gas system operators have done such a good job of installing emergency power generators at these facilities and storing fuel on site to operate them, diesel or other distillates. The problem is that due to regulations, only a limited amount of fuel can be stored at these facilities. And so the need for resupply of diesel is going to be massive. And it's going to be in the competition with hospitals and everybody else who has emergency power generators. We're going to have diesel fuel resuppliers have way too much demand relative to supply, and they're going to have to deliver this fuel in a severely disrupted environment with stoplights out, everything else that you can imagine. So yes, emergency power is great, but ultimately for natural gas systems to be able to resupply fuel to natural gas generators, which is essential to grid reliability, we need electric utilities to prioritize the restoration of service to gas compression stations. And of course, they have already planned to do that. This is an example of close coordination and improving coordination between the electricity and ONG subsectors. But how is that going to actually function in a severely disrupted cyber and EMP environment? How are communications going to go forward, for example, to continue these operations? That's the big puzzle, Ranger, is operating in a severely disrupted environment. And as Tom Galloway and others mentioned before, having the preparedness necessary to be able to fight through in this disrupted environment and actually implement the plans that are already in place.
All right, folks, thoughts based on what Paul just posed?
I agree with what Paul was saying when I was thinking about the scenario as well, and I think I already stated this. It's for the regulators, it's going to be the constant need for communication. So what the regulator would need is the information from both the natural gas sector, and we know, especially in Pennsylvania, I know we're talking about Bermuda, but in Pennsylvania, natural gas is very big in terms of the generation of electricity. So it's needed. And there's information and sharing of that information, because also the regulator is going to be inundated with a lot of different phone calls, not only from the governor's office, but more so the emergency management agency that will take the lead for the governor's office. And, everyone has the number of the elected. All the elected officials have the number of the regulators. So they're constantly going to be calling, and communications is key. So that also, in terms of the electric grid, making sure that we have communications up and running, and the need for that is vital in the course of sharing the information and moving forward in putting information out to those that need it.
All right, thank you, Gladys.
I'd jump in and kind of echo what's already been said, right? For me, the top two priorities would be communications and natural gas, right? Communications, because you're going to need to interact within electric utilities and cross sector, talk to your counterparts in natural gas and make sure that you can align on priorities. Also outward, from the ESCC in particular, in terms of unity of message, right? So that both the industry and government partners can align on what the priorities are, and there's going to be a lot of public angst, right? And having that, that cadence and unity of message will be important there. And as Paul observed, we're already very, very reliant on natural gas as a generation fuel source, and that's only going to increase as electrification continues. So those would be my top two priorities.
To follow up with that, one thing that hasn't been mentioned from the generation side, how are we picking them back up from the Black Start pathways? Black Start being, if we have a system blackout, or if we have the generation go down, how can we pick them back up? So if our Black Start pathways are impacted, if they're down, if the Black Start generators, and for those unaware, I simply explain Black Start generators as these jet engine generators. They fire and they try to pick up whatever generation that there is. So if your Black Start is down, that's going to be a huge concern, right? How long will it take to repair or make amends to get those generation facilities up, whether it's nuclear, coal, gas, whatever it may be, right? The second to that would be from the electricity standpoint, working with our local partners from a mutual interdependency matrix, right? What do we depend on them for? Do we need certain things to sustain transmission distribution operations, even just focusing on nothing but transmission? So what are our interconnects doing, whether it's Pennsylvania and Ohio or New York or anything else? If you look at the other regional transmission authorities, right, how is this impacting ERCOT? How is this impacting Texas? Or how is PJM, which is the Pennsylvania, New York area, and Ohio and others, how are they interacting with the ones south of them? So if you think about the interconnect, and as Gladys mentioned, from the regulator side, how are these communications flowing? What are the expectations being pushed down to the transmission distribution operators?
All right, thank you. And I think we'll hear from Rick, but I also like the rest of you to think about that mention of Black Start and also the impact of renewables as we transition a bit towards more renewables and what that means for Black Start. And then Rick, I believe you had a comment.
Yeah, the only other thing I'd add is in a situation like this, and in any situation like this, we'd also be looking at how to coordinate mutual aid, whether it's aid for, as Tom mentioned earlier, spare equipment, or whether it's for bodies, for those to come in and restore, or in a situation that includes the what might be tremendous demands on the workforce around a cyber attack, the bodies, the programmers, the responders in that cyber attack to actually get the systems back up.
Hey, Ranger, it's Paul. Let me offer a response to Adam, and then I promise to shut up. Everybody on the screen here is familiar with Black Start, but that maybe not be the case with everybody in the audience. So traditionally in the continental United States, when a blackout occurs, even a major blackout like 1965, you restore power from the outside in. That is, even in a big blacked out region, the surrounding region still is up and running. So you can take that electricity and move it into restart generation assets and serve critical loads in the blacked out region. But if China or Russia or other adversaries can create much larger, potentially even nationwide outages, then it's going to be necessary to do Black Start, and that is restore power from the inside out, from inside the blacked out region, doing exactly as Adam said, restarting Black Start units so they can send power down the cranking path, so they can then restart other generators, pick up load and sequentially, and build a big power island and integrate those power islands until the interconnections are reestablished. So Tom, I may have gotten that a little bit wrong. You could correct the record for me, but that's what Black Start is, and we can't do Black Start without natural gas, and natural gas flows to gas-fired generators. Someday in the future, maybe solar and wind will be able to contribute to Black Start if we can have grid-forming inverters. But we're many, many years away from that. Until then, natural gas resilience is absolutely essential for power restoration, especially Black Start. Apologies again, Ranger, for diving in.
No problem. I think it's an important topic because it goes to the heart of the matter. We've had a very bad day. How do we begin the restoration and recovery? Thoughts, folks?
Well, one of the things that we've talked about a little bit is communications. I'll say as a general matter, many of the utilities have their own out-of-band, generally radio communications that work within the footprint of the utility, but it speaks to the need for pre-planning and pre-drilling and pre-exercising really in today's world for gas companies, for electric companies to engage with at least their first order partners, their regulators, the essential services, maybe water systems that not only depend upon electricity, but electricity also depends on that water system to establish right now today alternative external communication paths. One of the things that we've observed in the tragedy of the Russian invasion of Ukraine is the usefulness of having external communications, in this case, in the form of Starlink, that or other things like that might be very useful for entities to consider how to have a communications path that does not depend on terrestrial resources.
All right, thank you. And one of the questions I saw come up is where does hydro figure in towards Black Start?
Hydro, where you have it, is a great black start resource, right? Just relying on physics. So unfortunately, it's very geographically dependent.
Yeah, I understand.
That's
Okay.
that's also to work with the nuclear power stations and any of their water depths, their water table heights. If they start to see pool height drops, can they still function? You know, in the event, let's say they're working with the Army Corps of Engineers, or they're working with any of the other water regulatory bodies. If they don't have the capacity to even operate because of some sort of water height problem, what other cascading will we see if we remove water dependent generation?
Okay, so we have a number of components here, and I guess I'll kind of ask it as a question. Our level of preparedness currently, are we feel very prepared from EMP or prepared for Black Start, or do we have a ways to go?
If I can jump in on that, because I did see the poll that was put up, and the large percentage of answers were those on the line said we're not prepared. And I know that we as panelists were not able to vote, but I was going to click that we're not prepared. And I say that because as a regulator, we really have done a lot to delve into this area and to prepare ourselves as regulators. But we as regulators are in different places across the country. I don't know if that requires a more uniform standard to be put in place. And I know with the different federal agencies that are in place, they are moving towards just that. But I still believe that we operate a little bit too much in our respective silos. And in order to have a plan that's put in place that we know exactly how things will move forward in terms of restoration of energy and things of that nature, we need to work a little bit harder at that. I also know that it takes, in terms of that, it takes recovery in terms of the cost of it. I know that's a big issue. That's a no-no, I think, that regulators think of because the cost is passed on to the consumer. And regulators have to be very cognizant of that and think about that in terms of what plans they need to put in place.
All right, thank you, Gladys. I see 2 hands up. I think Chris was first and then Tom, please.
Thanks, Ranger. Well, this discussion made me think I wanted to put a finer point on it as far as the importance that Paul laid out. Totally agree that that Black Start operations, that those often a gas fired plant isn't a Black Start unit, it's a Next Start unit, but that's really the workhorse of the entire Black Start enterprise. There is an interesting point that I think the folks on this panel have probably thought about. In the natural gas sector, you have firm delivery contracts and interruptible contracts, and the firm delivery are typically to households and businesses for heating and cooking, and the interruptible ones are for the electric power generation, broadly speaking. I was wondering if that is something that maybe at least for generators that are designated Next Start units, if that might be something that, from an operational standpoint, that folks on the panel would recommend, and also from a regulatory standpoint, is that something where you can make a fine enough distinction to say these kinds of assets need to have a fixed delivery versus others that maybe could be more flexible because they're not critical for Black Start cranking paths? I'll ask it back to Gladys because she's the one that prompted it in my mind to ask the question, but I think after that, anyone can also chip in, please. Thank you.
Well, thanks for the question, Chris. That's a hard one.
I wanted to give you I wanted to give you a softball. Just thanks for showing up.
I think it's not as much as a softball as you think. And I think it goes back to the fact that we as regulators are in different places. So I think we also, once again, the coordination and an understanding for regulators as well in terms of what needs to be in place. That's part of the discussion and conversations with our utilities, those that we regulate, and then also balancing that with the cost that is passed on to the consumers. I know, and I want to go back in terms of when I was chair of the Critical Infrastructure Committee, and then also Rick Monroe was there before me. I think he can agree that many of our regulators from around the country were just in different places. And the concern was the cost of recovery. And it still is the concern because we also have so many other things that go into the consideration of cost and being passed on to the consumers. So it's hard to say what we could recommend as regulators need to be put in place. That's why I said I don't think it was a softball question. You might have thought it was one.
I said softball sarcastically. I knew it was a tough question.
Chris, if I make one quick comment about and follow on to Gladys, and we both served in that position as the chair of the Critical Infrastructure Committee. But keep in mind, as much as Gladys did and I did try to encourage state public utility commissions to deal with these issues, remember, they only deal with the distribution level systems. They don't always have oversight in many states over the bulk power system. So as a result, there needs to be active coordination on this kind of planning, especially with black start propositions between the states, the state commissions, and federal regulators, as well as the industry.
Critical point. Thank you, Rick.
All right. Thank you, Rick. Let's see. I think we had Tom and
Yep. So the general question was readiness, right? And I'll maybe kind of take it from three dimensions: from the EMP standpoint, the cyber, and from Black Start, right? So the challenge in EMP is a very high consequence but low probability event, right? And you can argue that the probability is increasing. We're not really where we need to be right now, but we're moving in the right direction. EPRI has done tremendous work in terms of assessing the impacts of EMP and really kind of looking at what the design basis threat might be. And that's been focused primarily on large power transformers and control centers and substations to date, but they're doing equivalent work at the distribution level and generator level. And I would say that as new assets are coming online, EMP considerations are being included, right? But there's a cost benefit element there that really kind of goes to the utility interface with the regulators, right? On the cyber front, much more likely event, you could argue lesser consequence, at least not the same broad geographic area. Got a lot of work to do there yet, but have made pretty significant inroads in terms of network monitoring, separation between IT and OT networks and the like. And I think as daunting as an event like that might be, you'd have a lot more assets to kind of bring to bear to combat it. On the Black Start front, the biggest change there is really the tradition of the retirement of traditional assets that have been used for Black Start, right? So you're seeing a change in the resources and much more reliance on gas, right? That much more emphasis on that interdependence. And there's also downward pressure on what would constitute Black Start resources just based on a regulatory burden. So I think that is a watch area for us for those different reasons. So those are my remarks.
All right. Thank you, Tom. I think we'll go to David next and then Paul.
Yeah, thanks. And I wanted to echo the words of Gladys and Rick as to issues regarding interruptible versus not interruptible for natural gas. Chris, I agree. On the surface, it sounds super easy. We'll just really important power plants will use firm natural gas. But I'll tell you from an operational perspective, it is not that easy. In addition, if we think about weather circumstances, there have been times when a natural gas provider will declare a force majeure, and you can have all the firm contracts in the world that you want, and a contract is nothing more than a piece of paper. But if your provider declares a force majeure and says, I'm not going to help you and I can't help you, you're stuck. So it sounds interesting, but it's way more complex. Over.
All right, thank you, David. Paul.
I'm sure in this event, Dave, that it would be declared force majeure. I mean, 100%. And so agree with your comment. I want to ask my colleagues to also look ahead to the emerging threat. So Tom, I agree with you, cyber more likely than EMP, potentially lesser consequence, but with Chinese and Russian advances in artificial intelligence, their ability to map and execute at machine speed multiple tailored attacks across the United States at transmission and distribution systems, that puts us in a new world of potential consequences. And I think we need to begin to build preparedness against that scale of event, which is very different from 5 or even much less 10 years ago. Secondly, thinking about the advances in deep fakes, especially voice fakes that make that AI enables. If we think that we're going to be able to rely on voice communications in order to serve as a fallback means of communication across BPS entities, I think we're in deep trouble because advances in voice fakes now are putting that at risk. And those are just a couple of brief examples of the scenario today is terrific, but looking forward at advances in the threat, our ability to handle these issues is going to be at risk unless we also ramp up our preparedness efforts.
All right, thank you. Let's go to Adam and then David.
Yeah, thank you. We keep asking or referring to the preparedness effort, and I think we should also comment on the resilience. And as a reminder, resilience is not just being able to bounce back. It's being able to bounce back, efficiently, effectively, safely, getting back to a state of normalcy. When you think about the preparedness efforts supporting the resiliency, right? If you are facing a disruption, even if it's a EMP from a nuclear device or a coronal mass injection or something else, even from a cyber attack, there are certain things in place to help with that, right? We've talked a lot about Black Start. NERC requires Black Start operators, owners to test those Black Start generators annually. The system operators have requirements from their regulators as well as from NERC to have Black Start generation pathway and cranking path training, and they do that on a regular basis as well. From the preparedness side, I'll agree with Gladys, we are not. That was just illustrated from the industrial control systems that were hacked. They had poor cyber hygiene. They had just the regular out-of-the-box passwords on their systems. So if you think about passing, the cost on the consumer, as it's also been talked about, or the end user, if we were to just across the country harden our cyber defenses, whether it's the SCADA or ICS, the supervisory control and data acquisition systems, or the industrial control systems, yes, we could do that. At what cost? Are people actually able to recover those costs, as it's also been talked about? Does it make fiscal sense to do that if it would cost $7 trillion, right? Those are things to consider. And then ultimately, what are the simple things we can do to improve cyber hygiene, like changing the password out of the box on some of the control systems that we have in place, whether it's from electricity, water, or others. So from supporting the resiliency efforts, there are simple things we can do and have been doing, just it's not been a completely successful campaign on getting, I'll say, some of our smaller, maybe more rural agencies.
Let me follow on that. Thank you, Adam. With just kind of the thought of, I know we have the assets, we've had a bit of training. Has anybody actually really gamed out or tried a true Black Start outside of, say, Puerto Rico, where they had the complete island? I'll throw that out there. And then I believe David was next, and then Tom.
When Ranger, when you say a true black start, it's been my experience that customers tend not to like to have their lights turned off ever at all. So there have been innumerable tabletop exercises, including black start and natural gas coordination. I am not aware of exercises that literally operate in the real world that were not a function of an actual outage. People don't dig that very much.
Oh, yeah, I understand. Well, even going through the mechanics and motions, I sat through an 8-hour exercise just to determine the cranking path, and they still weren't finished.
Yep. So agree with Dave's comment, right? The periodic testing that's done for black start and cranking paths is typically used with simulation, right? There are a couple of utilities that have done some limited kind of real world kind of testing, but it's as Dave observed, the customers don't like to power out, so it's a limited opportunity.
All right, thank you. And I think we have Paul. And then what I'd like to do, because we're getting up close to the top of the hour, is we're going to make a bad day worse after the last couple comments here and play the second video.
Yeah, briefly, many of you know that utilities now have an opportunity to participate on Plum Island exercises off the coast of Long Island in a real world black start environment where all the power is out. There are no customers for the power, speaking to David's point, but it's really extremely helpful. So think about working with DOE to get engaged in black start if you're a utility. And then secondly, of course, the EIS Council under Avi's leadership has an ePro handbook coming out on black start in a contested environment with a massive shift to IBRs, inverter-based resources, rising importance of gas, threats to natural gas. Everybody should keep their eyes peeled for that handbook. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Paul. And okay, go ahead, Tom. We'll do one last before we play the video. And then as part of after the second video, I'd like you to also consider the potential for physical attacks in addition to what you're going to see there. Go ahead, Tom.
I was going to springboard up Adam's comment a little bit and talking about kind of like the investment in prevention. And I think I'd like to talk a little more about kind of like the restoration aspect, which is a big piece of resilience. But I can hold that till after the second video if it suits.
Okay, thanks. Chris, can we play the second video? We're going to make it worse now.
Thing is beginning to look more serious than just a conventional ransomware attack. Intermittent power outages across most of the regions of US, Europe, Asia. There have been sporadic outages at communications networks, cell phone service, spotty in many areas.
To give you a sense of how this event is affecting major cities, this natural gas drying plant's control systems were attacked, causing the facility to cease operations. That caused a number of power grid regions to go down, including a chemical plant here, whose backup generator failed to operate a chemical refrigeration unit, causing a minor explosion and a fire to break out.
We are seeing heavy disruptions to standard communications at this point. Information available to the public is becoming more and more limited. A number of major internet cloud providers have been attacked, causing retrieval disruptions, site slowdowns, and data loss for many users. And we are now seeing attacks around the world on nearly all critical lifeline networks. Some countries, the developing financial crisis is more serious than in others. Here is a UK news broadcast.
Because most banks, financial services, and insurance companies are closed, many companies can't pay employees and commodity distribution has slowed substantially. The government is planning to meet with EU and Asian finance ministries and banks to explore options for emergency financial mechanisms. It's a mostly cash economy in the UK at this point, and with banks closed, people's supplies of cash are dwindling.
All right, thank you, Chris. I want to thank Mary Lasky for a couple of the questions that she posed here. And let's start off with what has changed. We've now made it happening to you instead of near you, and it's worldwide as opposed to regional. Thoughts?
Well, you have in fact made a bad day much worse, and this is where utility providers are really going to rely on pre-existing plans and strategies to engage with their critical customers. So think about major metropolitan areas and the need for things like water and wastewater treatment. Think about things like hospitals, other locations with vulnerable population groups. And that's where the emergency management plans that should exist within utilities and understanding their key crucial customers, and then rolling out a little bit to include our government partners, our municipal agencies, state agencies, and to think about continuing the ability for the United States to be able to project force, thinking about key military installations and restoration and repair of facilities in order to enable the U.S. military to do what it needs to do, potentially responsive to adversaries.
All right, thank you, David. Other folks, thoughts? Where are we at this point?
It really depends. Like it depends, right? Do we have these micro processing problems? If our pole top devices have failed, or if 5G communications or SIM card networks are down, so are our pole top devices. So from the personnel standpoint, how many people are staying at home versus coming in? How are we supporting our own staff, our own crews to safely, effectively, and operate and control substation switching and underground networks, transmission networks, anything and everything. So if your people aren't in, how you taking care of your people is a really good start. And now that it's effectively become this nationwide problem. It's not just a Bermuda problem. Everyone is going to be having an opinion. How are you just supporting from a food, water, and substance and housing, the mass care side for your own internal? Because there are only certain people who can operate the bulk electric system. I cannot put myself in front of the desk and say, all right, here we go, because half of our transmission operators are staying at home. So those considerations have to be taken account of. And then we've talked about the microprocessing problem. If you don't have pole top devices, how are you doing switching, or how are you looking at the cranking pathways for these black start generators? Because if the black start generator itself is down, if you're not sure, if you have to check it, if you have to go through to make sure it was not impacted, well, what if it was? How long does it take to get those parts? Can you quickly find those parts? Can you fix it? How do you work with your, not state regulator like the Public Utilities Commission at the distribution, but NERC at the transmission side, or the RTOs, the transmission authorities? So all these things start to play in from this regional perspective, because it's not just Duquesne Light, right? What about all of the other thousands of operators across the country?
Mm-hmm. All right, thank you, Adam. We'll go to Gladys and then Tom.
When you were playing the scenario, and also I think it was a comment from David earlier, in the scenario when it was talking about people are going to more of a cash economy right now, and I thought of the convenience aspect of it, because you were talking earlier about whether or not there's preparation and planning in place and for a black start scenario. And I think it was David that stated that most people don't like to have their electricity out, even for a short period of time. And that's true. So I go back to what I think I was saying earlier, what I know I was saying earlier in terms of preparation. I know our former chair and former NARUC president, Rob Powelson, used to always use this line of do the boring good, meaning that those type of things in terms of constant training and looking in to see what we need to prepare for, it may not seem exciting. But it is important when your electricity goes out and you know exactly what to do. Maybe exactly is the wrong word, but you have in place, you've been preparing for this, and you're looking into different things. I think that continues to be very, very important because we are coming up on different things that we hadn't seen before. Puerto Rico was our Black Start event. I remember a lot of regulators saying, looking at Puerto Rico and the length of time I'm seeing in some of the comments in the chat feature, Puerto Rico was out for almost a whole year in terms of restoration there on the island. Difficult in all the different scenarios in terms of the supply chain. If you're talking about how impactful that was in Puerto Rico, think about it on a regional level within the mainland here in the US. We need to continue to look at these different things because we are not, in terms of a country of that likes to have anything in terms of their convenience taken away from them. I leave it with also communication is still very key, because we need to be able to communicate with one another, to figure out exactly what's going on, to pass on information that's needed, because then we're going to get a scenario where people are making up things. I always say that as humans, when we don't know something, we connect the dots ourselves, which is not necessarily the best thing to do, because it turns into something that it's a, we're already dealing with a difficult situation as it is. And when we have some inaccuracies that are also involved in it, it makes it even worse.
All right. Thank you, Gladys. And a couple of points. I come from California. We're a public safety power shutoff state. Folks are learning to do without power for days to a week at a time. It's quite the learning curve, but it's part of, I would call it preparing. The other thing is Puerto Rico, I believe, was one of the best mutual assistance efforts and really showcased what can be done when you bring the full effect of the utilities in this country to bear. That worked out quite well in the end. So I'm going to go to Tom, Adam, and then Paul, and we'll be getting kind of close to the end. So we'll take these three comments, and that may be it.
Okay, great. So thanks. So great point made by Paul earlier about like the evolving threat in the cyber dimension, right? And I definitely agree with his observations that AI is going to be kind of an amplifier there. And then kind of going to Adam's point, on the prevention side, right, we ought to do what makes sense to do, right? And there's a lot of kind of low-hanging fruit there. But we need to look at this both resilience from both a prevention and a restoration standpoint, right? So I think if you were threat agnostic, right, and you lost a bunch of assets in the electric industry, we look at how do you recover from that, irrespective of the cause. And on a good news front, we did some analysis in the transmission forum a while back that says you could operate the grid, without your normal emergency management system, just by communications between the control centers in the field, right, and manually operating breakers. And you could do that successfully for a finite time frame. The key is communication, as we've said a couple of different times. And then there's a fatigue element, right? And in an event like this, you're looking at not only the people that need to operate the grid, but their concerns for their families and the distractions related to that. So we've started to put focus in some of our resilience efforts in terms of family care considerations, that kind of came out in spades during the pandemic in terms of how do you man a control staff, as necessary, but also make sure that folks are able to kind of, make sure they can attend to their home needs as well. So those are my points. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Tom. Adam.
Looking at the, excuse me, the black sky, the black start piece of Puerto Rico is unique in that they're an island and hurricanes are going to happen. You really can't call what happened in Puerto Rico a black sky type event, because we could foresee a hurricane demolishing not just an outage, but they destroyed most of the distribution transmission system, which was the outage problem for a year. It's not just, fixing things, it's actually finding and rebuilding what was destroyed, demolished, no longer existing. So if you think about the EMP or the cyber side of this national problem, right, we don't have the ability to send mutual assistance. Even if you're a part of the National Mutual Assistance Group, if everybody is facing the same problem, they're not going to have the ability to give their resources. If you're a part of the transformer sharing plan, where, if you have a catastrophic problem and your transformer is 3 years out, you might be able to pick up or borrow somebody else's or have and pay for it at a certain cost. But at the end of the day, what if you don't have said ability to use or look to a neighbor or call a friend? some of those group type questions really go to like Tom's group, the NATF, like can they help facilitate looking at these critical infrastructure pieces? Are we going to pick up Washington, D.C., but are we going to pick up New Mexico first? Are we going to pick up Joint Base San Antonio, where they have the electromagnetic pulse testing facility? Like, what are we going to look at from a critical infrastructure first? Even if you have them already slated, within that certain slate, the national defense side, what becomes the first one? What grid picks it up first? If you have something that supports those, are you second behind it? Again, if you're going to look to phone a friend, who are helping decide and make those at the end of the day?
It'll make things interesting. Paul, and then if anybody else has any key comment they want to make, otherwise we'll move to Avi for closing comment.
We haven't spent enough time handing out praise on this panel. Gladys, you and Rick did terrific work in NARUC and in your own states to strengthen the regulatory approaches to resilience. Tom, the work that NATF has done on the spare tire initiative, everything else you've got underway. David, cyber mutual assistance. There's so many good things going underway. So I want to make sure the participants understand that important progress is underway and in the ONG subsector. But I want to raise a big policy question. In this kind of event, for sure, the president would determine that we are no longer in a homeland security environment. We're engaged in homeland defense. That is the military defense of the United States per Title 32, Chapter 9 of U.S. Code. The Secretary of Defense, Adam, would be determining which critical infrastructure needs to be defended as a priority, and how we would go forward in that environment is entirely unknown. DHS and DoD would be in support of the Department of Defense. How is that going to work? How are utilities in the CMA system going to lash up with DoD? Nobody knows. Fortunately, David is going to answer all these questions for us. Over to you, Ranger.
All right, thank you very much, Paul. Chris, I see your hand up.
Muted.
Chris, you're muted.
Whoops. Sorry. Just wanted to echo Paul's recognition of the great work that the folks on this panel have done and how much you've added to this discussion. And I think point two, you've demonstrated that we have just barely started the first paragraph of a tome that needs to be discussed here on all kinds of ramifications of all of these questions. I wanted to just say in regards to the EarthX Live series that the discussion about communications always keeps coming up, and we recognize it as you do, that it's critically important. The way we've structured these is to have a black sky scenario with always having electric sector here as part of the discussion, because we're talking about a blackout of the grid, but the other sectors that are also so closely linked. So the first one we did in September was beyond electric, was finance and water. This time it's regulatory and natural gas. We'll look to, I know we have a very high priority on emergency managers at probably the next one, but emergency communications will also be one that we want to phase in. So I just wanted to get that note and thank all the panelists once again for being here. Back to you, Ranger.
All right, thank you. Thank all the panelists as well as Lee and Chris for their efforts making this happen. I'd like to turn over to Avi now for some closing comments.
Thank you. Thank you, Ranger. I think this is a great way to move the ball forward. And as everyone has recognized, certainly all of our excellent panelists and everyone who's been commenting on the side in the chat, we're facing a different situation. The world is not the same as it was. And we humans are simply not good at dealing with complexity on the level that we're now facing. So this is a very serious challenge for us. And frankly, we're not talking about exciting new technology to solve this problem. From all of the indications and the studies and research we've done, it's not going to take an enormous amount of money. What it's going to take is awareness and willingness. And awareness and willingness in a democracy begins with the attitudes of people. And all of you who are involved in this, your concern, your interest is central to helping regulatory organizations and helping the nation broadly begin taking this with the level of seriousness it's going to require. So thank you. Please feel free to keep this discussion going among yourselves, in your families, among friends, in your workplaces, because at the end of the day, that's what it's going to take. And my absolute deepest thanks to Ranger, Chris, Leahy, and all of our excellent, very knowledgeable panelists.
Thank you, Avi. And we look forward to meeting everyone in Philadelphia. At least half of the members in the panel today are going to join us. So with all the people in the crowd, we hope to see you as well. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you.